What's happening, homeboys? Today I want to chop it up a little bit about the Cholo aesthetic as far as the dress code, which is one of many of our aesthetics. And just the care that we would take before we put on our clothes. We didn't just buy a pair of pants and throw them on. You know, you had to get the baby cuff on there first and then sew that up. And just all the love and pride and just the whole ritual that would be manifested from our soul into the clothes that we wore. And you know, and that goes back to the Zoot Suit days and the aesthetic them brothers had and the way they put it down. The care, the ironing, you know. I had a homeboy named Woody, an older homeboy named Woody from 11th Street. I'm from 17th Street clique. And me and my homie Turi were having a conversation about it. He's from the That's a Little Locals gang. He's my age. So Woody taught us this trick on the pants. He showed us to turn the pants inside out and run a piece of scotch tape along the front and the back, you know. And then you flip them back the normal way that they're supposed to go, and then you iron them. And especially with 501 jeans, because they're a little harder to crease. So he showed us that trick. You know, you run tape on the inside of the front and the back. When you iron them, the heat from the iron, it activates that adhesive on the scotch tape, and it would kind of like meld them. You know, them things will be for 3 weeks ironed and sharp with those creases on it. So that was a little trick the homie showed us. One thing that tripped me out is that when I was talking with the homie, he reminded me about how he remembers just a little detail like this. The homie Woody had some Nike Cortez on, and he said he looked at them carefully, and that fool had 3 little blue tacks on the sole of his Nike Cortez. You know, it's a white sole with a little stripe that starts thick and it gets thinner. And that fool had 3 little blue tacks along that line. You really had to look at them and pay attention to check those out. But that's just the type of pride and aesthetic, you know, that the homies would take in ironing their clothes and getting ready for the streets. I'll give you an example. Like, the homies gave me a black sweatshirt for my 17th birthday that had the hood on the back. Had the neighborhood, it had the street, and it had my clique in old English letters. And you know, I would take so much pride when I would sport that. You know, that was like every young boy's dream in the neighborhood to be sporting that sweatshirt. Whether they wanted to beef on the gang or they were afraid to join, whatever it was, you know, that's what a lot of them aspired to. Some of them did become, you know, and they wore it too. But I remember one night, the day they gave it to me, we had went and put in some work. And when I got back to the crib, you know, I was kind of like feeling glorious in an evil way. And you know, the sun was going down. We did this early before the sun went down. So I went home, showered, ironed my clothes, got G'd up, put my sweater on that the homies gave me for my birthday for the very first time. Then I started strolling out of my apartments through the alley, and there was like a dog food factory back there on that block I lived on Euclid Street, which would be 13th. And in there I would have my gats and shit stashed. So I jumped over that fence, I retrieved one of them, taking these shortcuts. I would always take shortcuts around the neighborhood because it's better than walking on main streets and the avenue to get to where I was going. So as I was going there, I'm kind of like going off subject, but you know, them fools came, our rivals came back, you know, and that sweatshirt, and this is what I'm trying to say about the clothing, that sweatshirt gave me away. I'm sure they would have recognized a gang member without that sweatshirt, without the letters, like a big Target sign. But nevertheless, I had it on, and I was proud, and I was strolling. I had my heat on me, and I was crossing the street to go into the cemetery and come out on the other end on 16th Street where we would kick it at. These fools passed behind me on a car, and I had my Spidey hearing on, and I heard one of them say, there goes one of them. So when I heard that, I doubled back, I had my shit out. They were making a 3-point turn to try to come back, get at me. But I started busting at them on the driveway. So that's another topic. But the thing I'm trying to say, excuse me. The thing I'm trying to say is that comparing that aesthetic of dress and the way we would do it and the care we took into it compared to today, you know, like everything is opposite. For one, the pant size had decreased dramatically. We went from big baggy pants to skinny jeans, you know. And I ain't gonna lie, I sport skinny jeans. You know, I try to keep up with the fashion and be a fly guy. But with that, you know, with the pant size being dramatically decreased, no more ironing. So right there, the care factor is gone. You know, the ritualistic part of getting ready for the night. You know, we used to iron, you know, put the bandana over the pants and iron. We used to iron our bandanas. Some homies used to even put old English letters on the bandanas and sport them. I mean, that's gangster, you know. That's a whole lot of love and care. So what I'm trying to say is, back then, you know, we would get ready for the streets. And especially like on a Friday or Saturday, you'd be getting G'd up. But at the same time, there was like something in your heart, like a dreading, because you know that the weekends, Fridays, Saturdays and shit like that, it's like the mother fools from them other neighborhoods were about to get, you know, local too. And you could feel the tension in the air back then, but you still felt like you had to be out there or you were going to be missing something. So, you know, we get G'd up. And my article of clothing, being that sweater, almost got me killed. You know, it was like a target on me. But then again, so was everything else we wore, whether it had your gang neighborhood letters on it or not. Because back then, after 6 p.m., you know, all the good citizens of the town and all the women would have their kids in the house after 6 p.m. You know, like Cholo said, it gets loped after dark. And back then, you know, after 6 p.m., only the gang members were out, the dope dealers and the dope fiends. You know, and back then it wasn't a fashion statement. Back then, if you looked the part, you were the part. And I don't care if they hit you up and you said you ain't from nowhere, they're still gonna smoke you. You know, it was a vicious thing back then. So now they wear clothes. They had pants with holes at the knees and shit. You know, they call it distressed. You could go in the Levi's store and buy a pair of pants and they'll cut them up and shit at the knees or wherever you want to make them look distressed. You see what I'm saying? And that's what the word they use. I mean, I guess now they're trying to achieve a look that looks rough or like you've been doing some work or got in a fight or something, but a lot of these motherfuckers now never been in a fight in their life, unless it was on the internet. You know, you got a whole bunch of internet bangers now. It's a damn shame, man. But in contrast, back then, you know, the homies weren't going to wear no pants with holes in them. The homies were going to get G'd up, bonnaroo down. If it did have a little hole or something, they'll stitch it up themselves because that's how much pride we had in our shit, you know. And the homies were getting bonnaroo down and getting down that night and squabbing. Or, you know, some type of gang violence, you know. They were ready to die for the cause, man. And instead of paying Levi's extra money to rip your pants, you know, we didn't want that. But the only holes that would come on your clothes were from fights. Or from even getting shot. I remember there was a homie that got shot at the pier. They missed him, but it went through his pants. It made whole in and exit wounds through his pants. And then he kind of wore those as a trophy. But see, he deserved those. He actually survived something. He didn't pay Levi's shit just to say, oh, I got tear in my pants. You know, that motherfucker almost got killed. You know, the homies were ready to die, you know, back then. For the cause. Because hanging out and those numbers that we used to hang out in those street corners back then, you know, you were just asking for trouble. You know, in these neighborhoods, you know, that just went with the territory. It was like a guerrilla warfare of ambushing and, you know, and whacking motherfuckers. So back then we understood as gang members that regardless of all the care and time we spent in the preparing our clothes ritual, we knew that at the end of the night, our clothes very well may be disturbed or distressed, I'm sorry. But not because we paid Levi's to do it, because some other crazy fool came through with a strap and shot a bullet through our clothes into our vital organs, causing blood to spill and ruin all them fresh ass G'd up clothes you were wearing. Your pants, shirt, Nike shoes full of blood. But you know, that's the type of behavior that we attained for. You know, we would get down with our own homies if they stepped on our shoes back then. It was like that. We inherited the baggy clothes and the creasing and just having your own style, unique, you know, from the Pachucos, from the Zoot Suiters. But the first Zoot Suiters were blacks. They were jazz musicians. And pretty soon, all the inner city kids, like in New York and the big cities, started wearing the Zoot Suit too, you know. They became very popular back then. It's what, I guess it's the beginning of what white people today call urban wear. You know what I'm saying? And that style spread to all the big cities and the ghettos and the barrios, you know. I'm assuming a major part of the popularity for that style of dress came from the music, just like hip hop influences, you know, the way kids dress now, you know. You know, the Zoot Suit was mainly worn by blacks and Chicanos, but also Filipinos and Japanese wore them, which is a trip when you think about today how much the Japanese people from Japan, you know, they're like intrigued with Chicano culture. They to this day, you know, they still, you know, they love the Cholo culture. They dress like that, you know, and it's kind of incredible, homie. You know what I'm saying? Although the blacks did come up with the Zoot Suit, the Chicanos took it to another level. You know, they gave it that much more flair, you know, with those coats with the broad shoulders and gangster hats, and just they did their own thing with it, you know. So the Chicano really gave it a distinctive style. You know, during World War II, the Zoot Suit was looked at as unpatriotic. You know, the white man started hating on the way the essays was looking sharp and fresh, you know. And since it was only like Chicanos and blacks wearing the Zoot Suits at that time, you know, then they labeled the Zoot Suiters as being thugs or gang members, you know. And you all know what happened next during that time, around World War II, the Zoot Suit riots, you know. But let me get back to the subject at hand. Chicanos wearing Zoot Suits later became Pachucos. Many people say that the Pachucos came from El Paso to LA. Some people say that the Pachucos, or let me rephrase that, the Zoot Suiters came from El Paso to LA. Some say that the Zoot Suiters came from LA to El Paso during the war and were stationed at Fort Bliss in El Paso and showed them brothers over there in El Paso the way we do it in LA, you know, with the Zoot Suits and stuff like that. What version is true, I don't know. But what I do know and firmly believe is that the word Pachuco does come from El Paso, and even more likely from Juarez, you know. Juarez is a place in Chihuahua, Mexico. My Uncle Kiko was a Zoot Suiter in those times, during the 40s and 50s, you know. And he relayed a story to me and my cousin once, that the reason El Paso, Texas is known as El Chuco, you know, or Chuco Town, is because of this. Check this out, this is a trick. He said that the Zoot Suiters that were in Juarez and in El Paso, they would buy their shoes in this industrial area where there was a lot of warehouses, and you see a lot of them between the border of Juarez and El Paso in the downtown area. He said there was a big brick factory building, and it had giant block letters that said shoe. The next word was CO. So in other words, shoe, CO dot, which is what? Shoe company. It's an abbreviation of CO. But the way Mexican people read it, you know, they didn't know English that well, but they would read it and it would say Chuco. So they would be like, hey, carnal, para dónde vas? Where you going? And they would say, voy para Chuco. I'm going to get some new shoes. You know what I'm saying? So little by little, they dropped the para Chuco. They would just say Pachuco. You know, it's like when you say, voy para allá, voy para acá. You just say, voy para allá, voy para acá. So it's interesting because it makes a whole lot of sense, you know. Another interesting word that I always wondered about was the origins of homeboy, you know. Because it is a very basic compound word, and I first heard it from gang members when I was a little kid, I thought the Mexican-American community came up with the word homeboy. Because it's very basic, you know. A Mexican person that don't know English that good would say, hey, I know him. He lives by my home. I know that boy. He's my homeboy. Basically, that's kind of like the idea I thought as a child growing up. But then I heard that the blacks used it in a very similar way. The ones that went from down south up to the big cities, you know, like New York and shit like that, Los Angeles, Chicago, they were like from Mississippi, and they would see their boys from their home, they would call them homeboy. So, you know, that word is kind of interesting because, you know, it's very much within the capacity of even using it in the Mexican community, where somebody from Mexico comes up to the States and they say, hey, that's my boy from back home. That's my homeboy. So we're homeboys too, you know. So as a young child whose first language was Spanish, I could see, or it was my hypothesis, that the Chicanos came up with that word. I bring up the word homeboy because it actually goes hand in hand with the Zoot Suit era. So with that being said, Chicanos and blacks have always coincided in these same neighborhoods and communities. So it comes as no surprise that we have borrowed from each other's culture, slang, and get down to stuff like that, you know, and even stole from it. We used to steal each other's lowriders and dames. We're from the ghetto, man. But we got to change that about ourselves. You know, Cholos and the Chicano style of gangbanging has been around since the 1890s, according to some sources. So, you know, we developed that shit into a motherfucking science, you know, with the style of dress, the Pendletons, the khakis, the t-shirts. You know, Crips and Bloods, they emulate that. The graffiti with the block letters, the emblematic big block letters, the enigmatic hand signs, the tattoos, you know, all that comes from the essays, you know. But like I said, you know, I feel like the blacks are like kind of like the Chicanos' big brothers when it comes to the English language and, you know, making it into a street style. Because we get a lot of our slang from them, you know, but in another sense, we're like their big brothers when it comes to the gang shit. Because, you know, the West Coast Chicanos got that shit down to a science. You know, with the numbers, with the lettering. You know, we don't just throw on any old jersey. It got to fit. The number got to be right. The color, in order to survive. You know, it comes down to the art of survival. You know, even the names that the Crips and Bloods use. Like, for instance, you might have a homie named Loco. Or you might have a homeboy named, they call him Spooky Loco. So the Crips and Bloods, they did the same thing. It's just like, hey, what's up, D-Loc? Or what's happening, Loco Mike? You know, they got the word loco from listening to the Cholos back in the days. So in some senses, they're our big brothers. In some senses, we're their big brothers, you know. Just take, for instance, in New York and the East Coast, you know, blacks invented breakdancing. But the Puerto Ricans took it to the floor and did something else with it, took it to another level. You know, so we, like I said, we borrow and steal from each other's culture. That's just the way it is. You know, a lot of these aspects are just my hypothesis and my opinion, you know. But what I do know for sure is that Mexicans and blacks are going to argue about it. And you know, this is on the side note. When I was in the feds, I had a transfer coming up. And I remember telling the counselor, I said, hey man, send me somewhere away where there ain't no blacks or Hispanics. And he said, why, aren't you Hispanic? I said, yeah, but man, my people and them black people, we crazy, man. It's loud. Send me somewhere cold and white up north so I could just relax and enjoy the rest of my time and go home. It didn't happen. And one last thing, I want you guys to check out 2 songs on YouTube. The first one is called Con Sapos by Ruben and the Jets. It's from the 70s. It's bad. It covers the Zoot Suit riots, Pachucos, and some LA history. Con Sapos by Ruben and the Jets. The other one is called Homeboy by Mr. Wiggles. And it's like from the 50s or 60s. You're going to learn a lot about the word homeboy just listening to the song. Both of those is bad. I'm going to try to put the links in the description. And on one more side note, Ruben and the Jets, his name is Ruben Guevara. He's actually from Santa Monica. And he got some documentaries talking about the hood way back when. You know, check him out. And I'm out. Like and subscribe.